Shalom to the elect of Israel. I want to start by giving all the praises, honor, and glory to whom it rightfully belongs, which is Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Hakwadash. And what I said was all the praises, honor, and glory belongs to Yahweh, who was the Heavenly Father, whom the world ignorantly calls God, and the name of his Son, Yahweh Shai, who was the Messiah, whom the world ignorantly calls Jesus, and in the name of the Holy Spirit, which in Hebrew is Hakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone that rule well and who I learned this truth from. Peace, blessings, and salutations to the elect. All right, and this, is another Milk Series lesson going into the story of Jacob and Esau, man. All right, and I have to spell it like this as you see on the screen because of YouTube. All right, in their algorithm. But Lord willing, they don't, do what they normally do. All right, and Lord willing, this lesson is edifying to the elect, to the newcomers and that, to any newcomers, okay, to the faith that's just waking up in these last minutes, days, and hours, man. All right, this story of Jacob and Esau, all right, this is one man that we're living out, okay. This is the this is the story, that we Israelites, okay, are living out, man. Us Hebrew Israelites, man, us so-called blacks, Latinos, Native American Indians, all right, we're living this out, man. Our forefathers, Jacob and Esau, okay, let me say our forefather Jacob, okay, and his fraternal twin brother Esau, his wicked fraternal twin brother Esau, he, they, at one point in time in history, all right, which they were descended from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, from Abraham and Isaac, okay, forgive me, but, and they had a struggle, going on, and it was prophecy, all right, and destiny, regarding them and their descendants, all right. So, this story of Jacob and Esau, man, this is one for the ages, man, okay, this is one for the ages, all right, and we live this out, okay. And this defines once again, this is part what defines what we're going through, in this world, having these devils, these so-called white man in power, all right, and us, coming into power, okay. And this also describes who we are, okay, or different characteristics and things like that, which we're going to get into. Okay, but Jacob and Esau, man, all right. Now Jacob in the Hebrew, his name means supplanter, but the way you say Jacob in Hebrew is Yaquab, okay, and he is the progenitor or the ancestor, all right, of the Hebrew Israelites, which are the so-called blacks, Latinos, and Native American Indians. Okay, we are the real Hebrew Israelites according to the Bible, and Jacob, whose name was later changed to Israel, he is one of our forefathers, okay? And he had 12 sons, which are also known as the 12 patriarchs. And they all had children, which turned into what? The 12 tribes of Israel, and that's us, okay? But Esau, all right, and the Hebrew, and they went in, if you look in the blue letter Bible, they changed it, all right? But in the Hebrew, his name is Ishashua, okay? And he's the progenitor of the so-called white man. All right, Esau back then, in that time, the man himself, who was named that, he is the progenitor of the so-called white man. Okay, you so-called Caucasians. All right, you are small hats. He's also as well. He's the progenitor of you. All right, you all descend from him. Okay, so let's start here. This is the book of Genesis, the 25th chapter, starting at verse 19. And these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah the wife, the daughter of Bethuel the Syrian of Padan Aram, the sister to Laban the Syrian. So Isaac, who was descended from Abraham, all right, he had a wife named Rebekah. Okay, verse 21. And Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife. He went to the Lord, asked him, it says because she was barren, because Rebekah here she wasn't able to have children. all right, it says, and the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. Okay, so once again, Isaac took Rebekah as his wife. Okay, and Rebekah was barren, so he went to the Lord. Okay, and he entreated the Lord. He asked the Lord, okay, about the situation, praying to him and things like that. All right, the Lord was entreated of him, as it says, and allowed Rebekah to have children. Okay, she became pregnant, in other words. Okay, she conceived. Genesis 25 and 22. And the children struggled together within her, and struggled meaning fight. Okay, and the ones that were in her womb were Jacob and Esau, man. Okay, not the whole nation themselves. All right, not saying like we were all in Rebekah's womb at one point in time. Okay, but our two ancestors, our ancestors, our ancestor Jacob, are the ancestor of the so-called white man Esau. These two children here at this point were in Rebekah's womb, but they were fighting. That's why it says they struggled together within her. And she said, if it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord. Verse 23. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb. All right. So the Lord is telling her, 2 nations are in thy womb, meaning what? The 2 children that you have in your womb, they're each going to come out and have their own nation of people. Okay. And Jacob, all right, he later on had what? The nation of Israel, which are who? You so-called blacks, Latinos, and Native American Indians. Okay. And Esau, all right, he later on had who? The nation of Edom, which are who? You so-called white people, man. And this isn't just, feeling. No, this is actual study. This is what the Bible talks about. But people in the world don't have the correct understanding. All right. And it says, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels, right? Because everything us so-called blacks, Latinos, Native Americans do, all right, we're different. We have different mannerisms, all right, and we're a different type of people than these so-called white people. Everything we do, the way we dress, the way we dance, the way we talk, the way we cook, all of that stuff is different. Okay, the way we celebrate is even different, man. For example, our people. Let's use so-called black people, for example. When we get together, say we have a cookout or whatever, it's a whole bunch of lively music, Jake dancing, cooking on the grill at the same time. Okay, when the so-called white man does it, I don't even remember hearing about hearing white people cook out. Okay, but if they do, it's really like distasteful, man. Okay, plus they dance different. Okay, they dress different. We're 2 manners of people, man. Okay, and this is in the Bible. Everybody wonders why so-called blacks and whites, we have these different things about ourselves. Well, it goes back to this. Everyone wonders why we have these different qualities and characteristics about ourselves, because it goes back to this: 2 manners of people. All right, and not just only so-called blacks, but you so-called Latinos, Native American Indians. We all have we're different. All right, we're all the same people, our so-called blacks, Latinos, Native Americans. All right, but we come from our different tribes. But we're the same nation of people, the nation of Israel, all right? And ultimately, we're different from the so-called white men, okay? We're different, man. Right? Then that verse continues on to say, and the one people shall be stronger than the other people, right? And that one people is talking about us Israelites, all right? We're physically, mentally, and spiritually stronger than the so-called white man. All right, physical, everybody sees that. Everybody knows so-called black people are stronger than the so-called white man. Everybody knows that, man. And you even have, as you see here on the screen, different great athletes like Mike Tyson, Bo Jackson. I believe that's I don't know who that is right there on the left, Slam Duncan, but Jesse Owens. Our makeup, our build, our strength is we're naturally better and stronger than them. Okay, we're taller, all right, for the most part, all right. As the Apostle Ronald said, our makeup, the way our bodies are made up, and just looking at even another example, a brother brought out as a little kid, you could see a so-called black kid as a young kid having abs, but you look at a so-called white kid as he's frail, he doesn't have muscles like that. He has to work at it hard. You see? when Jake is just when our people are just naturally gifted, all right. And you'll hear brothers say Jake, all right, because it's short for Jacob, which is who we descend from, all right. But then it goes on to say, and the elders shall. Oh, and by the way, before I go to that, because I mentioned the physical aspect, also mentally as well, because the so-called white man, for example, he'll go from making over 6 figures, right, to, if he goes from making 6 figures to let's say 40K a year, he's ready to off himself. He'll call suicide, the help hotline. He'll call. He can't take challenges like we do. Our people struggle all the time. Now, you think they could deal with that? No, man. Even look at what we went through with slavery. Our people endured that. You think they could endure the stuff we went to? No, they can't, man. They're not equipped like we are. You see, once again, and the one people shall be stronger than the other people. All right, not just only on a physical level, but a mental level as well. All right. But let me say this too regarding slavery. In the kingdom, they're going to have to go through it. Doesn't matter how weak they are. But that's another lesson for another time. All right. Then it says, and the elder shall serve the younger. All right. And the elder meaning who? The one who comes out of the womb first, which would be the elder. Him and his nation of people are going to serve the one who comes out of the womb second in his nation of people. You see? Which ultimately Esau came out of the womb first. All right. And he's an ancestor of you so-called white people. So it's written in the Bible that you're going to serve the one in his nation who came out the womb second. Okay. The one who came out of the womb second in his nation of people, which is Jacob. All right. You're going to be serving the Israelites in the kingdom to come. You see, as you see the sign here, the white man's destiny according to the Holy Bible, which is slavery. Okay. This is a fact. All right. This is what's coming, and a lot of people don't like this, but this is what's in the Bible. All right, this is coming, for the so-called white man, and as well as all these other heathen nations. Okay, but here we're specifically dealing with the so-called white man. This is his destiny, slavery, man. Okay, under the Israelites. You see, they want to say they think that they won't go into slavery, and they won't pay for the stuff they did to us. Well, that's not what's written in the Bible. All right. But moving on, this is the book of Genesis, chapter 25 and verse 24. And when her days, meaning Rebekah's days, to be delivered were fulfilled, when it was time for her to birth these 2 children, behold, there were twins in her womb. And a lot of people would think that, what we're saying is false because it says twins, but they don't understand that there's not only identical twins, but you have fraternal twins. Now, it says here, fraternal twins result from the fertilization of 2 separate eggs with 2 different sperm during the same pregnancy. Fraternal twins may not have the same sex or appearance. See? So you can't say Jacob and Esau look the same just because it says twins. Fraternal twins, all right, don't have to look the same, which in this case of Jacob and Esau, they did not, right? It says they share half their genomes just like any other sibling, all right? But once again, Jacob and Esau are 2 totally different, all right, people and nations of people. Now, I typed it now on Google under the AI overview. It says, yes, fraternal twins have different characteristics. They develop from two separate eggs fertilized by They develop from 2 separate eggs fertilized by 2 separate sperm, making them genetically no more alike than any other siblings. This means they can have physical traits, personalities. This means they can have different physical traits, personalities, 2 manners of people, and even different sexes. Okay? So fraternal twins, they're not even, they're not a part of the same egg. They come from 2 separate eggs during a woman's pregnancy. Okay? They come from 2 separate eggs, and they have their own different characteristics. Even they don't have to look exactly the same, unlike identical twins. Okay? Their own personalities. All right? And this is what's going on with Jacob and Esau, man. All right? You see, this is the fraternal twins is what Jacob and Esau were. All right? So moving on. Genesis 25 and 25. It says, and the first came out red all over like an hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. Yeah. All right. Now it says red all over like an hairy garment. All right. It doesn't mean that he was, in this verse is not saying he's a hairy person, although Esau is hairy. And another scripture does talk about him being that way. All right. But, you know, when you read in, I believe in the book of Exodus, you know, when they were given an example, it talks about ram skins dyed red. Okay. You know, so it's given it's you know, likening Esau to like a ram, like a skin dyed red. That's why it says all over like an hairy garment. You know, because when Esau came out, all right, hence the name Ishashua, which means wasted away is he. That's what Esau's name really means. Wasted away is he. And what's wasted away is pigmentation. You know, it's color. This is why they look the way that they do, the so-called white men. This is why they look the way they do. Their blood shows forth through their skin. You see? And blood is what? Red. It says, and the first came out red, all over like an hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. You see? Verse 26. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob, and Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. All right? And people say Jacob's name means heel holder, but no, it doesn't. It really means supplanter. Okay? You know, if I put that in the beginning of the picture, I don't remember if I did or not, so it's lucky if I did, but it means supplanter. Supplanter means, you know, basically to get over on somebody, you know, by being tricky. And that's another characteristic that we Israelites have from our forefather Jacob. Okay? Getting over on somebody, you know. That's a characteristic that we have. Okay? But it says, and after, I'm going to read it again, Genesis 25 and 26, and after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel. All right, and that was symbolic. Okay, that he actually did that, but it also meant something, is what I'm saying. It says, and his name was called Jacob, and Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. A score is 20, and says 80, so Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah had these children. Right? But once again, what Jacob did here actually meant something. And what did it mean? Now, let's go to 2 Ezra chapter 6, starting in verse 7. This is the prophet Esdras speaking. Then answered I and said, what shall be the parting asunder of the times? Or when shall be the end of the first and the beginning of it that followeth? And what the prophet Esdras is asking here, you know, basically he's asking the Lord, like, when is going to be the end of the first earth age? You know? When is going to be the end of Esau's rulership? Because as it says in Job 9:24, the earth is given into the hand of the wicked. Okay? And also, he's asking, so the prophet Esdras is asking the Lord, when is, you know, this first earth age going to be over with? It says in the beginning of it that followeth. So basically, when is the end of Esau's kingdom, and when is going to be the beginning of the kingdom of heaven? Verse 8, and he said unto me, from Abraham unto Isaac, when Jacob and Esau were born of him, Jacob's hand held first the heel of Esau. Okay, which we just read. See? And what did it mean? Verse 9, for Esau is the end of the world, and Jacob is the beginning of it that followeth. Now, before completely explaining what it means, let's understand something. As the scripture says, with all thy getting, get understanding. When it says this word world, what is it talking about? Now, in Greek, you have three definitions of the word world. You have cosmos, all right, which goes into a separate society. Then you have oikumene, which means the whole inhabited earth. And then you have the word eon, which means a period of time or age. Now, the scriptures say this, Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and verse 4, one generation passeth away, and another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. So, when people think about the end of the world, when people say that, they normally think that the earth is going to be destroyed, but that's not true. According to the Bible, it says the earth abideth forever. You see? So the earth is always going to be here. So, in this context, eon, all right, which means a period of time or age, would be the correct usage for world in 2 Ezra 6 and 9. So what does this mean? This means that the Edomites will be ruling at the end of this world or age and then be taken down. And afterwards, the Israelites will have complete global domination over the entire earth in righteousness. So let's read it again. 2 Ezra chapter 6 and verse 9. For Esau is the end of the world, the end of the age. right? He'd be ruling at the end of the world and then be taken down. And Jacob is the beginning of it that followeth. And after he goes down, all right, the Israelites are going to have the next ruling power. The Israelites are going to be the next rulers over the world. And this is going to happen when Yahushua returns and America is destroyed. Those nuclear missiles are shot off, okay? And the elect are beamed up. That's going to be the beginning of Jacob's rulership. And that's going to be the end of Esau's rulership, this current period of time that we live in now. You see? And that is what, and and Esau is going to be pulled out of power. And that is what was meant when Jacob held on to Esau's heel, when he grabbed Esau's heel. All right? There's a reason he did that, and that's the reason. Okay? And all of this, what we're going through now, prophecy playing and, forward and up to World War III and things like these, all right? Ultimately, it's going to lead to Yahushua's return, and that is going to be the end of Esau's world and the beginning of Jacob's world. See? Now, let's go back to where we left off in Genesis 25. Okay? Now, it says, and the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter. Because when you look at the so-called white man, right? Now, the man Esau actually was a cunning hunter, okay? He was a, actual hunter, but his descendants also carry these same characteristics. All right. You look at the so-called white man, he goes hunting, as you see these pictures here. These are actual pictures people took. You see, even a little kid, all right, hunting, killing animals. All right. This picture here says you don't stop hunting when you get old. You get old when you stop hunting. The mindset of the so-called white man, right? Taking out rhinos, bears, for what? Just for fun. This is a part of their nature. Everyone, people wonder why the so-called white man goes hunting. Well, the scriptures tell you when the boys grew and Esau was a cunning hunter. That's what they do. All right. See, it says some men are just born with hunting in their souls, and that is the so-called white man. Okay. Then also remember, if you don't know what this is by just looking at it, all right, and read it to you. This is a good example. Now, let me read this. It says, Cecil the lion was a well-known male African lion who lived in Hwange National Park, Zimbabwe. He was part of a long-term research study by Oxford University's Wildlife Conservation Research Unit. In July 2015, Cecil was killed by an American dentist named Walter Palmer, who paid to hunt him outside the protected park. So this man, this devil, this Edomite, he paid to hunt. Slocky, he paid to hunt this lion. Okay? He paid to. He didn't have to, he paid to, man. It's the devil, the so-called white man. And Esau was a cunning hunter. Says Cecil's death sparked a global outrage and brought attention to the controversial practice of trophy hunting. You see? This devil is killing the animals, man. So look, even the animals want this devil to be gone. Okay? This man entraps them, he kills them. Okay? He also does what? Entrap them in the zoos and everything like that. This devil has to go. But moving on, it says, what was Esau? Also a man of the field. Esau the man, he would, go, he was a hunter, he would go out in the field, things like that. And his descendants, the so-called white people, they carry these same things today. You see? They go dwell in the field, camping, rock climbing, cave diving. A man of the field. All right? And this one doesn't need an in-depth breakdown. It says, and Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. Right? Jacob was an ordinary, he was, a homebody, just chilling. And that is what we, so-called blacks, Latinos, Native Americans, have. We carry those characteristics of our forefather Jacob. We're just homebody. We like to chill. Jake always say, I'm just chilling, man. He calling me like, look, yeah, I'm just chilling. I'm just chilling. I'm just in the house chilling. When I'm outside, I'm just chilling. That we don't do what the so-called white man does. Two men as a people, once again. All right? Moving on. Verse 28, and Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. And Jacob side pottage, meaning he cooked pottage. He boiled it. And Esau came from the field and he was faint. Yeah, because once again, Esau was a man of the field, a kind of hunter, and he was tired. So Esau came. So while Jacob was boiling pottage, cooking that pottage up, Esau came back from the field and he was real tired and he was, weary. And Esau said to Jacob, feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore was his name called Edom. All right. And This pottage contained meat, Hebrews 12:16, lest there be any fornicator or profane person as Esau, who for one morsel of meat sold his birthright. Okay? And it said it was red because it wasn't fully cooked. It still had blood in it. And this is a characteristic that the so-called white man has. They like to eat their meat not fully cooked, you know, and sometimes even raw. Okay? You know, there's no coincidence that the scriptures link up so perfectly with the so-called white man like this. You know, there's no coincidence. These are the descendants of Esau, the so-called white man. All right. Whereas we Israelites, we live, and you know, it's actually against the law. It's actually a sin to eat meat like this. The scriptures say that you're not supposed to eat meat with the blood in it. All right. So what does that mean? It has to be well done. It has to be fully cooked. We Israelites, we like our meat fully cooked. You so-called blacks, Latinos, Native Americans, all right? We, at least for the most part, and for those that don't, you should, all right? We eat our meat well done, okay? We don't eat medium rare with a little bit of, you know, we don't do that. That's something the so-called white man does, all right? Moving on, though. Genesis 25:31-34 says, and Jacob said, sell me this day thy birthright. So Esau was tired. But the spirit was on Jacob to tell him, look, all right, but sell me this day your birthright. Sell your birthright to me. And that's recognized through the spirit. Jacob said, sell me, all right? People like to say he stole it, but he says, sell me, meaning you yourself give it to me. You know, it has to be of you to give it to me. Verse 32, and Esau said, behold, I am at the point to die. And what profit shall this birthright do to me? And Jacob said, swear to me this day. And look, what did Esau do? And he sware unto him, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob. That is etched in stone, man. Okay? And that can't be changed. All right? Esau messed it up for you so-called white people. You know, he messed it up for the so-called white man. All right? You don't have the birthright anymore. We do. Okay, and it was all set up through the spirit. Jacob did not sin by doing that. You see? Verse 34, then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and rose up, and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Okay? Now let's look at Romans 9. Romans chapter 9. I'm going to start at verse 10. It says, and not only this, but when Rebekah, and this is Apostle Paul that wrote this. And not only this, but when Rebekah also had conceived by one, even by our father Isaac, verse 11, for the children, Jacob and Esau, being not yet born, neither having done any good or evil, that the purpose of the Most High according to election might stand, not of works, but of him that calleth. So this means the Lord had already chosen before Jacob or Esau did any good or bad deeds. It was all the Lord's choice. You see? So people, when they hear us bring the story out, they think, you know, we just being opinionated and deceitful, you know, bringing it out how we bring it out. But that's the truth, okay? And the Lord had already made his choice before Jacob and Esau did anything good or bad, as we read. Verse 12-13, it says, and it was said unto her, the elder shall serve the younger, as we read. Verse 13, as it is written, Jacob have I loved, has the Lord loved. And this is quoted from Malachi, the 1st chapter. As it is written, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. Yeah, the Lord loves Jacob and his descendants, the Israelites, and hates Esau, all right, his descendants, the so-called white man. So how does God love everybody? He doesn't. All right, some Christians say God loves everyone. No, he does not, because this is written in the scriptures. Esau have I hated. You can't hate somebody, or you can't say you love someone and then hate them. All right, you know, the Lord clearly states that he hates the Edomites, man. He hates them, okay, but he loves the Israelites, you see? So was the Lord wrong for choosing Jacob and rejecting Esau? No. Romans 9, continuing on 15-16, for he saith to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. Just like he told Moses, all right, he'll have mercy and compassion on whoever he wants. All right, so he's not wrong for that. Verse 16, so then it is not of him that willeth, nor of him that runneth, but of the Most High that showeth mercy. I mean, you can't do nothing for it. All right, it's all of the Lord. So the Lord does whatever he wants. You see, and the Lord set it up like he did with Jacob and Esau. All right. You know, this is the story, man, going about Jacob and Esau, and other brothers have done lessons on this. You can go check that out, you know, if you're new to the faith. All right. But yeah, man, this is the story, man. Okay. And hey, remember, Esau is the end of the world, and Jacob is the beginning of it that followeth. And we about to come up real soon. We about to be the next ruling power over the world, man. The Hebrew Israelites, so-called blacks, Latinos, Native American Indians. Once Yahweh Shai makes his second return to this world and takes his devil Esau out of power. All right. Now will be the end of his world and the beginning of Israelites' world, ruling in righteousness forevermore. So with that, giving all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Rachakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone at Ruel. Peace, blessings, and salutations to the elect. Shalom to the elect.